When Luffy senses Joyboy's presence during the final saga, most fans immediately saw it as a sign of strength. Another hint that Luffy had reached a new tier. Another moment to confirm that he'd surpassed everyone else. Another box checked on the shonen power scaling chart. But that take misses what's actually happening. That moment, the shift in the air, the quiet stillness, the way characters react, was never framed like a power move. It wasn't about domination, it wasn't about threat, and it definitely wasn't about placing Luffy on top of some imaginary ladder. It was about recognition. Oda didn't stage the scene like other conquerors' hockey displays. No one fainted. No enemies collapsed. No shockwaves ripped through the island. Instead, the entire atmosphere paused. People stopped and noticed, but they didn't look afraid. They looked aware. That difference matters, because power is loud, but meaning is quiet. And in One Piece, that quiet moment might be one of the most important scenes in the entire final saga. If this were about strength, Oda knows how to show it. We've seen what raw power looks like in One Piece. Intense pressure, shattered rooms, entire groups falling unconscious without a punch being thrown. That's how hierarchy looks when it's enforced. But in this scene, none of that happens. No one is knocked out. No one trembles. No one sees Luffy and thinks, "We're outmatched." Instead, the reaction is subtle. It's quiet. It's instinctive. Characters don't feel overpowered. They feel connected. They're sensing something that isn't meant to push them down, but draw them in. That changes the entire logic of how we interpret the scene. Power scaling depends on comparison. It's always asking, who's stronger? Who wins? Who's dominant? But this moment isn't about comparison. It doesn't show Luffy rising above anyone else. It shows him becoming aligned with something larger than himself, something older. That's not a new level, it's a new role. Here's what a lot of fans forget. Joyboy was never famous for being the strongest person in history. He wasn't feared like a tyrant. He wasn't remembered for conquering anything. People didn't bow to him out of fear. They followed him because they believed in him. That matters. Fear forces people to obey. Belief gives them a reason to stay. Luffy's presence in that scene doesn't crush the people around him. It invites them in. The mood feels ancient, not explosive. It doesn't scream, "Final battle." It feels like something old and familiar returning. This isn't about passing down power. It's about passing down presence. Joyboy wasn't a title to be claimed. He was a presence that left a mark. And Luffy isn't trying to become someone else. He's embodying what Joyboy once meant. And that presence doesn't strike, it resonates. One Piece has always been clear. Inherited will isn't a superpower. It's a mindset, a legacy, a way of being. Roger didn't change the world because no one could beat him. He changed it because he lived freely and spoke the truth. That freedom inspired others. Whitebeard didn't demand loyalty because people were afraid of him. He earned it by protecting others. He made people feel safe, not through strength, but through stability. Luffy fits into that same pattern. He doesn't lead with fear. He doesn't need to assert control. He leads by being himself. And that self gives others permission to be free too. So this isn't about Luffy gaining Joyboy's powers. It's not an upgrade. It's about him stepping into a role, one that's always been defined by presence, not force. Power makes people obey. Presence gives them a choice. And in this scene, people don't pull away from Luffy. They feel drawn in. Once you notice what's happening here, you start to recognize it in other stories. Take My Hero Academia. When Deku loses One for All, many fans saw that as a low point, a sign of weakness. But the story didn't treat it that way. Deku doesn't collapse. He doesn't fade. He stands. Because the point wasn't the power. It was what he learned from it. That moment wasn't about loss. It was about clarity. Deku had become the kind of person who didn't need the power to do the right thing. Same with Jujutsu Kaisen. Gojo's presence shakes the world, not just because of what he can do, but because of what he represents. Even sealed, people act differently just knowing he exists. That's presence. Even Attack on Titan plays with this. Eren's final form isn't terrifying just because it's big. It's terrifying because it confirms a truth fans didn't want to face. That shift isn't about destruction, it's about revelation. These moments aren't about characters becoming stronger, they're about them becoming clearer. And Luffy's moment sits in that same category. Here's where it all shifts. If Luffy's presence isn't about domination, then the final conflict in One Piece won't be either. And that's huge. Because while power can take down a person, it can't take down a system. You can beat a tyrant, you can destroy a symbol, but if the system underneath it survives, nothing really changes. Presence can do what power can't. It can change what people believe in. That's why this scene doesn't feel like the beginning of a final battle. It feels like the beginning of an awakening. A realization that the old ways are starting to break down, not through violence, but through clarity. This isn't a threat, it's a reminder. A quiet shift that signals something much bigger. This is what One Piece has always been about. Freedom. Real freedom isn't about standing at the top. It's not about having more power than anyone else. It's about living without chains, living without fear, living in a way that lets others do the same. Luffy doesn't impose his will. He doesn't tell people how to live. He just lives the way he wants, and that draws others in. That's why his crew doesn't follow him out of obligation. They follow because they want to. That's why this scene doesn't roar. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to. Because freedom, when it's real, doesn't need to shout. It resonates. And resonance spreads. So why do so many fans misread this scene? Because the way we talk about anime today is obsessed with one question. Who's stronger? Every debate circles back to power scaling. Who beats who? Who's top 5? Who's fallen off? So when a scene like this comes along, one that refuses to play by those rules, people try to force it into that frame. They treat it like a stat boost, a transformation, a new tier. But One Piece has never cared about that. It cares about meaning. And this scene isn't about Luffy becoming the strongest. It's about Luffy stepping into something he was always meant to represent. The moment makes sense when you stop trying to rank it and start trying to feel it. This isn't a final victory. It's a setup, a signal about what kind of ending One Piece is aiming for. It's not a big final punch. It's not someone taking a throne. It's not about crowning a king. It's about changing what people believe in. We're not heading toward a war where one person wins. We're heading toward a world that wakes up. A world that finally realizes what it's been missing and what it no longer needs to fear. And when that happens, it won't look like a battle. It'll look like a release. And that takes us straight into the next story. Because if this moment in One Piece was never about power, then there's another anime where a similar moment flipped everything. A moment that fans still argue about today. In My Hero Academia, Deku loses One for All, and the entire arc shifts. At first, it looked like a setback, but that loss was actually the key to the entire story. In episode 2, we break down that moment, what it meant, why it worked, and why sometimes the moment fans hate the most is the one that reveals everything.